Hi, my name is Callie Sanders, and I want to start off by talking about the functional behavioral assessment. And that is an approach that incorporates a variety of techniques and strategies to diagnose the causes and to identify likely interventions intended to address problem behaviors. In other words, it leads an observer beyond the symptom or behavior to the underlying motivation for it. Who conducts an FBA? First, we have the IEP team, which are teachers, administration, related service personnel such as a school social worker, parents and students when appropriate. Second, we have the student assistant team. And third, we have qualified professionals such as a psychologist. Step 1 in conducting an FBA is identify and define the problem behavior. Before an FBA can be conducted, it is necessary to pinpoint behavior causing learning or discipline problems and define behavior in concrete terms that are easy to communicate and simple to measure and record. For example, down here we see that Trish's problem behavior is aggression. If we were going to write that in a concrete definition, that would be, Trish hits other students during recess when she does not get her way. In collecting information about student behavior, the team should take into consideration teacher expectations for the student academic performance as well as classroom conduct. In assessing a student's behavior, it is also important to consider whether a particular response may relate to cultural differences or expectations. Once the team has defined the problem behavior in concrete terms, they can begin to devise a plan for the FBA. Step 2. Collect information to determine function. Determining the specific contextual factors for behavior is accomplished by collecting information on various conditions in which the student is most and least likely to exhibit problem behavior. Information collected indirectly and directly allows school personnel, such as a school social worker, to predict the circumstances under which the problem behavior is likely and not likely to occur. Direct assessment is observing the problem behavior, and indirect relies on interviews from teachers and other adults. Step 3. Categorize behavior. Form a hypothesis. Once a team has defined the behavior and gathered data about when, where, and how it is being demonstrated, the team is ready for why the behavior is occurring. The hypothesis then is a statement describing the team's conclusions about the probable causes and deficits for the student's manifestation of behavior. One way to reach a conclusion is through a data triangle. The team can visually compare information from scatter plots, ABC charts, and interviews to help form the hypothesis about the behavior that will be used to develop the behavior intervention plan. Next, we're going to talk about creating a behavior intervention plan. A BIP is designed for a specific child to try to help that child learn to change his or her behavior. The individual education program team should develop the BIP. The plan should focus on the whole child and teach the child coping strategies. The plan must address the function of the behavior and include information gathered in the functional behavioral assessment. Required elements in the behavior intervention plan are, as we can see, a description of previously tried interventions and how well they did or didn't work in changing the behavior. A definition or description of the behavior being targeted. a description of the interventions that will be used, including who will be involved, specific procedures that will be followed, and an explanation of how data will be collected. A measurable description of the behavior changes you expect to see. A description of how the success of the intervention will be measured. A schedule for when or how often the plan will be reviewed to determine its effectiveness. A description of how and when information will be shared between the home and school. And lastly, a description of how the student's behavior will be handled should it reach crisis proportions, and this is called a crisis plan. Lastly, when writing a BIP, make sure everything is spelled out clearly and specifically so the plan can be used easily by everyone involved with the student. Keep the plan 2 to 3 pages in length so it is easier to remember and follow. Make sure that interventions included have the resources and ability to implement consistently. Lastly, consistency and teamwork are key to help the student rid inappropriate behaviors at school. I want to conclude the presentation by showing you an example of a behavioral plan. Here, the student is named John Smith. He is in the 6th grade and he is 12 years old. In the plan, it discusses his strengths, his individualized information about the student, previously implemented interventions. Next, it begins to talk about probable behaviors that he is having at school. On page 2, it continues about his 2nd probable behavior on down to his 3rd. Lastly, on page 3, it talks about the schedule for review, as well as provisions for home coordination to get the family involved. And lastly, it talks about the crisis management plan. This concludes my presentation, and thank you very much. Have a great evening.